The war against sex trafficking and the exploitation of children by predators who prey on them for profit or their own gratification may be the most important human rights battle of our time. This week's conversation is with someone on the front lines of that struggle. Stacey Efaw is the executive director of Selah Freedom. Stacey grew up in a military family. She lived in the Tampa Bay area in the 1980s when her family was stationed at MacDill Air Force Base. She earned her bachelor's degree and an MBA at the University of South Florida. After a short stint in the corporate world, Stacey entered nonprofit leadership, and she has more than 20 years of experience in that realm. Selah Freedom is a nonprofit anti-human trafficking organization based in Florida in the Midwest with a mission to end sex trafficking and bring freedom to the exploited through 4 strong programs: advocacy and awareness, prevention, outreach, and residential. Stacey, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Heavy, but undeniably a crucial topic today. So again, Thanks for joining us. And more importantly, thank you for the work that you and your team do.
Thank you.
Let's start with a 30,000-foot view. Are there statistics about how many children are approached by sexual predators and how many children are sexually abused each year?
Yeah, unfortunately, they are pretty sad statistics. The estimate now is that 1 in 10 children are sexually abused by the time they are 18, and 1 in 5 are approached by an abuser by the time they're 18.
That's staggering. I actually didn't know those statistics, and heart-wrenching.
Yep. Yes, it is.
My wife and I have 3 kids, and so you take 2 of their friends and you're saying that there's 1 in 5 that's been approached.
Yep.
Oh, we have a lot to talk about for parents today, that's for sure. And can you tell us, what is the distinction between individual sexual predators and sex trafficking?
Well, all traffickers are sex predators. A trafficker will take it just a step further. That's when it gets into where they engage their victim into commercial sexual activity, selling them on the market. They often use fraud, force, or coercion. An individual sexual predator is someone who's just really going for their own individual pleasure or addiction that they have.
And are there statistics that tell us how prevalent the sex trafficking industry is? And are there numbers to indicate how many sex trafficking victims are under age 18?
Yeah, it is become over a $99 billion industry. It's right second to the gun and drug industry. So they're all they vibe up and down for number 1, which is sad. It's really hard to get an exact number of sex trafficking victims, because a lot of them don't report it, which is one of the hardest parts that we have on our job, especially under 18. But I do know in 2021, in all the federal prosecutions cases, 57% of them did involve children. So those are cases that made it to prosecution.
I was looking at a video on YouTube this morning of Selah Freedom, and there was a case, I'm not sure when it was, but there was 150 people arrested on this massive, massive sting like that. That's unbelievable.
Yes. Yeah. We do a lot of work with law enforcement, and they're really starting to target the traffickers.
And I know that they mentioned there was a new division within the Florida Police Department, in terms of the human trafficking division. How does that work in terms of how long does an investigation like that go on for? Do you bring them leads? Do they come to you and say, hey, we may have found something. Can you help us here?
We have a task force that it actually includes FBI, local law enforcement, and Homeland Security. That's how big of the problem it is. And a lot of people are like, well, why don't you just go after that massage parlor? And they did one a few years ago, but what they did was, it was about a year in the planning, and they actually went into 8 massage parlors at the same time, but they also got the owner of the massage parlors, and he was in Hawaii. Because if you close one down, they're just going to open another one down the street. You have to get to the head of the organizations, and that's kind of what they're trying to do. It's kind of like, arresting the little small time drug pusher versus the main person. So the law enforcement's really trying to get to the head of the organizations.
And we'll talk about more later, but to your point about, everyone says just go to that massage parlor because that's where they think the seedy, shady place is. But you can't Google human trafficking without seeing 4 or 5 different sting operations that have occurred nationally in the last week or so. I remember the other day I looked, and there was one in New Jersey, there was one in San Diego, there was one in Arizona, all within a week. And it's not your massage parlor. It's everything but.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
And for decades, we've heard that rape is a crime that is underreported, perhaps by as much as 80%. Is this the same true for child sex abuse and child sex trafficking?
Yes, unfortunately, it does really go underreported. As I think we'll talk further, a lot of times it's it's someone that the child knows. So there's a big emotional thing about turning in the abuser. If it's a stranger, those incidences get reported a little bit, higher rate. But when it's a family member, a friend, your teacher, your coach, there's an extreme emotional aspect of that.
Many people hear the words sex trafficking and say, I live in a safe neighborhood. That doesn't have anything to do with me. I've got the white picket fence and 2 golden retrievers. Who are the stakeholders in the battle against sex trafficking?
Unfortunately, children are the prime targets right now. Children, teenagers are the prime targets. We actually have a survivor that we're working with right now. She was raised in a gated country club community. She was being trafficked by her best friend's father, selling her to the men in the neighborhood. So after I heard that story, I really realized there really are no boundaries. Typically, yes, youth that are at risk have a higher potential, but it really can happen anywhere.
Her best friend's father.
Mm-hmm.
Did the
Yes.
best friend, air quotes around best friend, did they have any idea?
She claimed that she didn't know, and she probably didn't. Yeah.
In the gated country club community, and it was just the father of all of her friends.
Yep.
Her father's
Yes.
friends.
Yeah.
That's a sad state.
Mm-hmm.
And to my earlier
Yeah.
point, that shows how severe and widespread this plague has become.
Right.
When children and teenagers are the prime targets of predators, is there any profile of a potential sex abuse victim or sex trafficking victim?
I wish there was. You look at the police stings, and is all ages, all races. It's very hard to tell. We just have to
Anyone,
be
anywhere.
aware. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about your organization. How did Selah Freedom get its name?
So Selah stands for a Hebrew word, which means pause, rest, and restore. And that's kind of what we give our survivors. When they come into our home or into our program, they get that chance to really pause, rest, reflect, and be restored.
And what services do you offer, and where do you offer them?
So we actually serve survivors all over the nation. They come to our safe home. We are located in Central Florida, in the Tampa Bay area. We do have also a prevention arm up in Chicago. And we have 5 divisions at Selah Freedom. The first one is our awareness team that goes out and does like this public awareness, also fundraising and advocacy, really working with the lawmakers to have tougher penalties for buyers of sex, because if you can stop the demand, and also against traffickers. Our prevention team, which I think we'll talk about later, goes into the schools and youth organizations to help educate children against trafficking and what they can do to protect themselves. We have our residential programming, which is short-term and long-term. In those programs, they can stay with us up to 2 years. And we provide everything, housing, food, clothing, mental health therapy, trauma therapy. And we work really hard on their schooling and their careers. And our outreach team, that's the team that goes along with the police with the police stings, also goes with the victims to court to help testify against their trafficker. And then the outreach team also does offer the same programming that the residential programs go through, but it's on an outpatient basis. And then we have our consulting team, which is helping to open safe homes all over the US.
So you mentioned Florida, Chicago, opening homes all over the US. How big is your geographic reach?
So like our homes mainly are here in Central Florida, but our reach, we're actually training an organization in Canada right now to open a safe home.
Terrific. And unfortunately, it is an international crime.
Yes. Yeah.
And to that point, are there any other organizations doing all the things that Selah Freedom does?
There's so many great organizations out there right now helping with the trafficking and situation, and they all kind of offer different things. I don't know of anyone that's offering all that we offer, but there are some really great organizations out there.
So you mentioned Selah Freedom got its start in Florida. How'd you make the leap from a state nonprofit to a regional one to a national one?
So we've, been in the industry for about 11 years, and we've made some great strides, also some mistakes. Our first pattern was our first what we wanted to do was open safe homes all over the US and run them ourselves. And we tried that and it really didn't work well. You really need to know that community. You need to have community involvement. You need to know the contacts. So we've kind of backpedaled on that. But now what we do is we have a consulting program where we will train others. So if you're in Nebraska and you want to open a safe home, you can come to us and we'll train you on how to open a safe home properly. We give them everything from their, employee handbooks to the trauma therapy, anything they need to know, because that's our way to help the mission nationally.
Something that I especially like about Selah Freedom is that you go into the schools and educate kids, and that you have age-appropriate content from kindergarten all the way through college. Would you share a little about that material for each age group, please?
Yeah, it is really geared towards the ages. In the elementary schools, we really talk about, we don't go in there and say, hey, I'm going to teach you about sex trafficking, because obviously they wouldn't know and be way above their head. And it's more about the difference between a secret and a surprise. And if someone tells you to keep a secret, but it makes you feel icky, what should you do? We talk about the bathing suit and the bathing suit parts. We help them identify 3 safe adults they can go to if someone makes them feel bad, or, they just have a bad feeling when they're around someone, kind of more touching on those type of things. Then you go into the middle school and the high school, we get more into, we're a little bit more upfront about it, about what's happening, sexual abuse, same thing, what to do if you're approached. And really go in the technology, because so much of it now is online. So we have a lot of courses that go deep into that.
I think there's a sense by the time our kids get to high school that they're pretty savvy. They don't need us to talk to them about the dangers of sexual predators or sex trafficking. You're just talking about college-age kids. Why are they still vulnerable? And what should parents be talking to them about?
In the college, a lot of the sugar dating that we're seeing. Also, the OnlyFans page, where people can have their own website and they think they're innocent, just showing pictures of themselves, but it often progresses. That's the OnlyFans right now is a big place where they are targeted. The police are targeting. There's a lot of prostitution happening through that website. So, and if you look at the Epstein situation, in the colleges now, they're recruiting a lot of the other students to become recruiters. So it's not like you're being approached by, some strange man at a bar. You're being approached by the student next to you, and they're encouraging you to come to this party. There's a lot of rich people there, and all we got to do is hang out. And it just progresses from there. Or, oh, they just want to take pictures. It's a modeling job. So it's those kind of things, especially kids that have been grown up, somewhat sheltered, which we all like to shelter our children as much as we can. If we could keep them in a bubble, we would. But they get out there in the real world and they're naive. So that's why we still talk to the college kids.
You were interviewed by your local media about a case involving a school principal who was sending sexually explicit texts to an undercover detective he thought was a teenager. While noting that such incidents are unfortunately not uncommon, you also said it's happening more and more. Is that because social media makes it so much easier for predators to contact children?
Absolutely. You don't need them right next to you anymore. And, I read a report that was put together by the Department of Education. It's a 10-year-old report. And it says that 1 in 10 students, by the time they're from kindergarten to senior in high school, will be approached by a school employee for inappropriate sexual relationship. So that's it's Department of Education, saying that 1 in 10 is going to be approached. And I know that data is old and it's much higher, but yeah, the social media just gives, anybody access to your child. It's gone are the days where they're sitting next to you in the living room and you think they're safe. You don't know who they're talking to and what's happening to them.
You've told the story of a 7-year-old who was dropped off at a friend's birthday party and lured to a neighbor's house where the man sexually assaulted her. The child was brave, thank God, and had been taught enough that she told her mother what happened. The man was arrested, but he'd apparently assaulted many, many other children. Why don't sexual assault victims speak up?
Scared, they're fearful, they're ashamed. The abusers threaten them and say, if you do this, I'm going to hurt your brother. I'm going to do this to your sister. No one will believe you. You made me do this. It's all emotional. Also, I think some kids are just not taught, what to do. and they're scared to talk to their parents, or they're embarrassed about it, because it is a shame. It's embarrassing that that happened to you. And they don't feel that they have that comfort with their parents or whoever's raising them to be able to talk about it. So I think it's so important that we open those channels of communication, because if this child had not said anything, it could have gone on to hundreds more children. They say, but I read a report that on average, sexual predator in his lifetime will commit about 120 sexual crimes for different people. So it's a lot.
That's sickening. 120.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience, did children ever make up stories about being assaulted?
Rarely. I mean, especially you're talking about elementary kids. Most of them don't know, wouldn't even know to come up with that. I always say you're on the side of the child, and if your kid says something about this, you might find it hard to believe, because he might be saying, Uncle so-and-so or cousin so-and-so did this to me, and you just can't believe it, but they don't normally make up those things.
You've said that sexual predators could be just about anyone, but are there any common denominators, anything that most or all predators have in common?
Just things I've seen is they typically try to be around children. If you think about it, everyone's shocked that it's the coach or the Disney employee, but if you think about it, they're trying to get where children are. So, and I see it all the time where people are like, I can't believe he was such a nice person, or she was such an amazing lady. She always had the kids over. So, yeah, it's just hard to find one common denominator.
Has there been any research to understand why someone who had something as horrible as sexual abuse happen to them as a child would then do the same thing to child after child?
They say that someone who's been abused has a trouble of distinguishing between love and abuse. And if it's what they've learned, they just repeat the pattern. Luckily, the statistics are that only 1/3 of abusers tend to repeat the cycle. So that is good, but you still got the third that's out there. And it's just, I think it's they have holes in themselves emotionally. They have not gone through counseling. They, have not recovered themselves. So they just repeat the pattern.
And certainly not all children who are sexually abused become sexual abusers. Do we know why those that do become abusers?
I think, again, the not getting treatment, not getting counseling, not dealing with the issue, getting to the root cause of, why it happened to them and how they can overcome it. I've seen this too. Even when I ran a food pantry, you'd see some kids come back and they repeat the pattern of going to the food pantry to get the groceries. And it's just, that's how their family is run. And then you get the others that they're like, no, they go off to college, they become a success. They don't want to have to go to food pantry. So I'm not sure to say what makes one person successful over the other, but I do think, counseling and getting help when something does happen to you can really help your chances of not repeating it.
And Stacey, here's a tough question that I have difficulty grappling. How do you and your team maintain your mental health and well-being as you do what has to be such a difficult and heartbreaking job?
It's tough, and burnout is high in the industry. We do offer free trauma resolution therapy to our staff members that we pay for as an organization, because you can get, residual trauma by hearing the stories, going to the court and hearing everything replayed, often videotapes and pictures, and it's hard to not be affected by it. I know personally, I try to focus on the successes. We have just so many amazing success stories of survivors that we have helped, and they've just gone on to have great lives. And that's what encourages me and keeps me going.
Those are the stories we like to hear more of.
Yes, yes.
You've been in the nonprofit social services world for more than 20 years. Did you recognize all the potential dangers to your kids before you joined Selah Freedom?
No, and I actually feel so guilty about it. So I'm hoping that I can just help other parents now and not make anybody feel guilty for not knowing. I probably knew more than others just from being in social services. And my mom was a psychologist. She would talk to us about child sexual abuse, and she's talked to my children about it, because she would counsel a lot of people. She said almost everyone that she counseled was sexually abused. So I probably knew a little bit more, but I had no idea the online aspect of it. I, again, suffer with my own guilt. Luckily too, I know nothing has happened to my children, but just not being aware, again, living in my own bubble.
Given all the disturbing stories about predators being coaches, teachers, pastors, or the person next door, how do we trust any adult with our kids?
That's a tough question. I would say trust your gut and watch your child. I think the best thing we can do is educate our children about the topic because you can't be there with them all the time. You just can't. That's why I'm so passionate about our prevention training. Um, and again, trusting your gut. If your child does not want to go, you see them acting different around when this person comes in the room, or you can kind of get a sense. And I think, again, it's parents being aware. I feel like, unfortunately, we're all so busy that sometimes we miss these clues that the kids are trying to tell us, and we're going 100 miles an hour, and the child's trying to tell us, and we're just not catching it.
Something as simple as paying more attention to your kid.
Yes.
Would we be going overboard or invading someone's privacy if we ran our own background check on a coach or an adult who works with our kids?
I wouldn't think so. You can do background checks anonymously on people online now. I mean, we hope that the schools do it, but I've heard cases of where schools, they just push a predator from school system to school system. Same with churches. They'll have a pastor that is, they found out that he was abusing, and instead of, they're worried that their church is going to be in the paper and have bad press, so they push him along to another church. So you can't really trust the organizations as much as you should be able to.
One myth about sexual abuse of children is that it's always the creepy guy in the white van that pulls up to them and snatches them off the sidewalk. How often is that the case compared to the child being abused by someone they know and trust?
I think it's about 6% is the snatching, 3 to 6%. It's around 80% of people that they are acquaintance to, like somehow like a neighbor, something like that. And I think it's about 18% of a very close family member.
And in cases where the child is abducted by that man or men, what's the likely outcome? And because, do we need to warn children about that possibility too?
Yes, you still do. I mean, I absolutely think you should teach them not to trust strangers. What to do if someone's approaching them. We had a girl that went through our prevention training. She actually worked at a local grocery store, and this man kept coming up to her and coming into her line every time that he was checking out groceries. Even if she had a line of people, he would make it to her line, and he kept asking her questions, personal questions. And she just was just so scared. She's like, it felt like I couldn't be rude. I had to answer them. And in the classes, we taught her, you don't have to answer those, just empowering them. And then she also went and talked to her manager about the man. So just letting them know that, if someone's making you feel uncomfortable, you have the power, even though they're an adult, and we all teach respect of adults, you have the power to not answer those questions. And, so I think you do have to teach them about strangers as well.
You've actually talked with a man who was an online predator, haven't you?
I didn't talk to him. I observed his interview. It was recorded.
Got it.
So yeah, yes.
And what did you learn?
Something alarming. One of the first things he asked his potential victim is, do your parents get on your phone or your computer? And if they say yes, he clicks off and goes on to the next child.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Do predators exploit the same vulnerabilities that they had as a child? Or are they very good at just figuring out what a child is missing in their life and trying to fill that void?
Both. I think some kids you can just sense right away that they're going to be a little more vulnerable, that they're a little bit more shy, they're not going to stand up for themselves. But they do use a process called grooming, where they really get to know the child and they befriend them. They get to know, like, oh, is your mom not listening to you, or did you have a bad day at school? And they become their friend, and they start to gain that child's trust. And that's how those relationships start.
And how can we make our kids or grandkids predator proof, if at all?
Back to the education, teaching them what is appropriate, what is not, what can they do, that they are empowered and they have the right to tell an adult no, and who they should speak to, and keeping those lines of communication open. And if something does happen to them, to remain calm and have an open conversation. I think so many kids are just scared their parents are going to freak out and all of that. But teaching them what to do if they're approached is probably the number one thing.
And what are the warning signs that the child is especially vulnerable to potential abuse, and warning signs that someone may be attempting to abuse a child?
You may see changes in your child, like if they are being abused, such as they might become withdrawn, they might become more angry, they might not want to go to somebody's house that you normally go to. There can be like physical signs too that a child's been abused. Yeah, so just really, again, being more aware.
As a parent, I know my kids aren't happy about parents looking at their cell phone, and especially as they get older. How do you balance respect for their privacy or independence with the need to keep them safe?
This is a tough one. I think just being on there at some point and letting them know that you're going to check their phone will right away stop them from doing certain things. Not just they can get in trouble just with pictures of themselves, nowadays, not even as far as the trafficking, but I unfortunately, I feel some parents in America don't want to be parents anymore. They just want to be their child's friends, and you're the only parent they have, and they have a lot of friends. It's kind of my thought, and I do agree with respecting boundaries, but in today's age, with everything that's going on, I think safety is a little more important of an issue. And I think just the fact of going on their phone and checking or having those apps that you can check will just kind of make them think twice about doing certain things on their phone.
Some of the sex trafficking survivors who go through your program become mentors and speakers. How many of them want to share those experiences and provide support for others? And how many really want to put that past behind them?
I'd say it's about half. Some of them, it's just too triggering. They just can't, go back to the home and work there. They can't speak about it. And others are the opposite. They become so passionate and become some of our best employees, where they want to make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else. They want to show that person in jail right now or on the street that they can turn their life around.
As there's been more recognition of the sex trafficking crisis, more and more people or groups have been opening homes for survivors. Is there a right way and a wrong way to help sex trafficking survivors?
Yes, and this is something unfortunately we're seeing. We'll see people that have a really good heart and they just want to get a house and get the people off the street, and they have no idea what they're dealing with. The trauma that these victims have gone through is extremely intense, and I wouldn't recommend anybody starting a program without help of professionals, of psychiatrists and psychologists, mental health counselors. Because if you don't get to the root problem and you don't heal those hurts, properly, it's just going to be a revolving door. We've seen situations where they just almost re-traumatize the victims, and it ends up traumatizing the staff and the volunteers. So that's why we're so passionate about our consulting program, so that we can teach people a model that is working.
What you and your colleagues have done and what other nonprofits are doing is amazing and so commendable. But it seems like solving this crisis is also going to take more resources from cities, states, and the federal government, both on the law enforcement side and the human services side. What would you like to see from them in terms of funding, policies, and programming?
I'd like to see tougher penalties for traffickers, which they are pushing for, and also for buyers of sex. If you stop demand, well, then you start, it's all money and greed, a lot of it. So they are working towards that. I know the state of Florida has mandated that every child go through 45 minutes of sex trafficking prevention education. I think it should be, which I commend. I think that's great. I think it should be more. And I think every child in school should have to go through the education.
And I acknowledge at the start that this was a heavy conversation about a difficult topic. But I know because of people like you, there are glimmers of hope. Would you share with us a story or two that have touched your heart and kept you fighting this good fight?
Yeah. Oh gosh, we have plenty. We have one girl, she was sexually abused by her father growing up, and then he started selling her to his friends because of his drug problem. And you hear of stories like that and you think, how do you overcome that? I mean, that's just, your dad is supposed to be the person that protects you, and here he's, using you so you can get high again. But she has just overcome the whole situation. She went through our program. She went through all the therapy. She is now on staff. And again, one of our more passionate employees, just helping people. She's now has been married and has 2 young boys herself, bought her first home, got her AA degree. And when she was with us, she had to work on her GED. So just seeing, giving her the chance to have the life that she dreamed of. Sometimes we can't choose who our parents are or the situation we're born into, but seeing how much they overcome and they use their pain. She even says her pain is now her passion. So using that pain that she went through is now become her life's purpose. We have another graduate, and she's gone on, and she is a volunteer, but she's not on staff, but she, during the program, got her nail license certificate, and she is so busy that you can't get into her for 3 weeks. So, and then she comes in and volunteers with the girls. We have another girl working on her accounting degree. So it's just, and we have a man who is also working on his college degree, and he has gotten married and has a boy, and they got their apartment now. It's just giving them that chance to have that life that they really wanted. No one grows up thinking I want to have sex for money.
The life they certainly deserve.
Yes. Yep. They just need a chance.
Yes. And this is perhaps the biggest question of the day for you. How can people learn more about Selah Freedom and support your efforts?
They go to our website, selahfreedom.com. I highly encourage you to go there and watch all of our free trainings. We have trainings. You can educate yourself. I think the more people are educated about the topic, the more we can all come together and end it. Free trainings for youth. We can come to the schools and work with the youth directly, and also any financial donations. If it's the least you can do is give a small donation to help us keep going, that would be greatly appreciated. All nonprofits always need funding.
Stacey Efaw, thank you so much for being with us today. And again,
Thank you
for all the work that you do and your team.
Thank you for having us. I appreciate it.